Hey everybody, it's Dr. Shawne from Project Forgive. Welcome to Discover Forgiveness, Release Resentment. This conversation was created through a collaboration with discoverforgiveness.org. It's a digital hub that gives you access and actionable tools for more forgiveness in your life, and I know I want more of that. I'm sure you do too. It's supported through the Templeton World Charity Foundation, which is all about promoting scientific research that helps us flourish as humans. Now, throughout the conversation, you're going to see this website, reach.discoverforgiveness.org. And when you go there, it's going to take you to a free downloadable workbook. It's in many languages. It has a step-by-step approach for working through the process of forgiveness. And the reason I'm excited is because it's completely aligned with the teachings of Project Forgive, and I highly recommend you download it. Also, any information that's shared or mentioned during this discussion tonight will later be put in the comments, so you'll have easy access to that too. Now, at the heart of this conversation is critical thinking. You've heard me say this over and over and over on Project Forgive. And we're defining it as a process of actively analyzing, synthesizing, and or evaluating information. And you don't have to agree, disagree, you can even be neutral. And it's gathered from or generated by your observations, your experiences, your reflections, your reasonings, and even your communication. And the bottom line for me with critical thinking is that it's the underlying guide to your beliefs and your actions. Okay, to facilitate this conversation, joining me are two thought leaders that are masterful at fostering critical thinking and whom I have to say I deeply personally admire. I'm going to start with introducing Dr. Christena Cleveland. Hey, Dr. Cleveland.
Hello.
I'm so glad you're here. Let me talk about you for a sec. Dr. Cleveland is a social psychologist. She's a public theologian. She's an activist, and she's the director of the Center for Justice and Renewal. She's also a speaker and an author. She wrote a book called God is a Black Woman. Now, I had a dear friend recommend that I read this book. And I was like, okay, I'll check out this book. And while I was reading her book, it was a continuous process of critical thinking. I laughed. I cried. I agreed, I disagreed. I had to deeply process. And Dr. Cleveland's thoughts were and are embedded in my soul. And it doesn't matter what kind of journey you're on, whether it's spiritual or not, I highly recommend this book. And then also joining us is Seth Godin. Hey, Seth.
Hi, Doc. It's good to see you.
I'm so glad you're here. So I've been following Seth's blog for 20 years. Now, and when I receive his email, I just go, ooh, what's he going to say today? I really see Seth as a genius. He takes his business and marketing ideas and applies them to humanity in such a unique and digestible way that it's similar to the goal of Templeton, which is to support humans in flourishing on the planet. And Seth supports many charities, including Build On, Acumen, the Fuller Center, Lemon Tree, Room to Read, Charity Water, and others. Now, the goal tonight is to critically think about your belief system when it comes to forgiveness. So we're going to play with the distinction and link between deciding to forgive, which is tied to making a decision, and experiencing emotional forgiveness, which is about releasing resentment, anger, hurt, bitterness, whatever you have trailing along on you. So with that said, let me start with you, Dr. Cleveland, first. What are your thoughts about this distinction? And I'm going to say it again for our audience. Deciding to forgive versus experiencing emotional forgiveness. What are you thinking?
I think one is an intention and the other is an actual transformative alchemical process. And when I think about deciding to forgive, I'm reminded of the children's book with the little engine that could, like, I think I can, I think I can, I think I can. And if I just repeat this over enough times, I'll finally forgive. Which I think intention matters. I think desire matters. I think discipline matters. But we also need something beyond our personal intention. And I think that second piece, the actual experience of forgiveness, emotional forgiveness, is a surrender in a way. And that can be a surrender to any number of things. You don't have to have a particular belief system, but just an openness to the present, an openness to reality, and inviting other resources in to help you along. And that could be friends, wisdom from friends. It could be sacred texts. It could be embodied practices. But you're not doing it
Yeah. What
alone.
about you,
And it's
Seth?
not just, it's not alone. I'd say that.
Got it. Got it. And I'm sure in moments in critical thinking, it can be alone in the moment too, that you process thoughts and you come back to your best friend, or you come back to your pastor if that's what you do, or you come back to your boss if you're connected with your boss in that way. Yeah. So surrender is an interesting concept.
Well, you're lucky if you're connected to your boss in that way.
Actually, yeah.
I'm thinking a bunch of things. The first thing I'm thinking is how lucky I am to be on this call with the two of you. Dr. Cleveland, thank you for showing up the way you do and for the bravery and generosity you're bringing to the work. And I'm just really fortunate to be here with both of you. I would like to start by beginning with this whole idea of the math of forgiveness. The problem with pet peeves is that peeves make lousy pets. And that if we're so busy holding on to the grudges that we have and to the injustices that we've experienced, our hands are too full to hold on to possibility. And once we can just rationally understand that our forgiveness or lack of forgiveness has no impact on the system or the person that we are aggrieved at, we can realize it's on us to choose to live tomorrow a different way. So the intention, as Dr. Cleveland has said, is critical, because we become what we do, but we can't do something until we have an intention. And then the second part, which is a brilliant insight on your part, is that it's not enough to have intention, that there is then the release. And one of the things that keeps the release from happening is that deep down, many of us don't want it to go away. That we are used to leaning on our grievance. We are used to leaning on our anger. And if it goes away, whether we said we wanted it to or not, suddenly we have to confront the fact that we can be responsible for what's going to happen tomorrow, regardless of how bad what happened yesterday was.
All right. Well, this is a spicy conversation, as you would say, Dr. Cleveland. Spicy is your word. I've heard you say it many times. All right. So let's stay with us, because this is a great conversation. Anthropologically, we have tendencies to think as we process and to feel as we process. It's ideal to have both and get masterful at both. And we biologically have tendencies. I'm totally an emotional type of person, and I practice my emotional intelligence. Like, how do I process how I think? And also in communication, okay, this person is more emotional. I'm going to talk to them in a certain way to deepen that connection. So there's those pieces to it. With that said, can you have one without the other? Can you have both at the same time? Can you have had them and then lose them because you go to another layer? What about the process of that? Whoever wants to go.
We have lots of data about how our brains work. The whole idea that free will is a real thing is an illusion. What tends to happen is our emotions go first, our short cycles go first, and then we make up a story in our head to make it sound like that's what we planned on all along. And the narrative is important because the narrative is what starts baking in the patterns to our memory, what's baking into our habits. But it begins almost always with the annoyance, the frustration, the injustice of it hitting us at an emotional level. And then the question is, how are we going to process that so that we can regain agency?
What you thinking, Dr. Cleveland?
I think I agree, but I think I would add that a really classic theory in social psychology that has remarkably held up is that emotion E equals P times C, perception times cognition. And so you have some sort of perception. And then, yes, there's a story that's told, but sometimes I wonder if the story comes first and then the perception, because so many of us, particularly people of color who have lived with a lot of embodied trauma, we aren't many of us are not easily able to access our emotions or even our perceptions, but we might have a story that guides the way that we interpret perceptions. And so, I think you do need that story in place in order to have an emotion. But I think depending on your background, the order might vary.
That's a brilliant insight. Pema Chodron, one of my teachers, tells this great story. She's at a silent retreat. They're going to be sitting in Zazen for 5 or 10 days without speaking. And the first day, there's this guy 2 mats away from her, and he keeps making this clicking sound. For like 2 hours in silent meditation, he keeps making this clicking sound. She is furious. She's ready to break her vow, walk over and give this guy a piece of her mind. And then after a water break, she sits in a different spot and realizes the clicking is the radiator. And the guy had nothing to do with it. And as soon as she realizes it's an inanimate object that's doing the clicking, what is there to be mad at anymore? There's no intent on the person, and all of us are surrounded by systems. Some of these systems have reinforced social division and caste and racism and misogyny. And some of these systems have reinforced privilege and all sorts of other things that have enabled the world to be the way it is, good and bad. And when we see a system, sometimes it's like a radiator. Being mad at it isn't going to change it. What's going to change it is taking action. And we can take action in our narrative and in our community organizing with words and with stories more than we can take action by being angry.
Okay, I got to add 2 things. First, I want to repeat, free will is an illusion. That is very profound to say. I also want to talk about this notion of stories, because we really do make up stories. And as we evolve as humans, we want to be able to start shaping our own stories. And that's what we do at Project Forgive. We do the apology you'll never receive, because our brains are so powerful. If you're pretending someone's apologizing to you and they're not, you actually can feel release. You feel the change internally. And your being is what actually changes. And that's the power of it. How does this apply to forgiveness? As we're talking about this for, Mary or Sandra or Hassam just sitting at home right now, and they're like, okay, this is great thoughts. These are wonderful. What can I do today to help foster that? This deciding to forgive versus experiencing emotional freedom or forgiveness.
Dr. Cleveland, I'll let you go first this time.
Sure. I'm wondering, I think something Seth said earlier is resonating me in light of this question, identity. Who am I if I don't hold on to this? And to me, that speaks to, even though this person that you're looking for forgiveness from might exist outside of your physical body, to a certain extent, they're living inside you at this point, because that resentment, that it's shaping your identity, you're resisting against that. And it reminds me of when I was a younger activist, and my whole identity was resistance. And so if I didn't have something to cling to as the source of that resistance, then who was I? And so inviting myself into that process of release gave me space to realize I'm great at resistance, but really at the end of the day, I'm a creator. And if I release the resistance, it opens up space for me to dream, which is how I'm able to write a book like God as a Black Woman and be creative, because I'm not just focused on God is not a white man, although I believe that too, but I can also open up space to create a new mythology, a new cosmology. Not new, nothing's new, but you know what I mean? Beyond what I was taught. Yeah. And so I think to respond to what you said, Dr. Shawne, I think a big part of that, moving into that transformative second part of forgiveness, is questioning my identity. Why do I need to believe this story? Why do I need to? And inviting maybe even community in to give me insight, because sometimes it's hard to do that on our own. I'm curious what you think, Seth, about that, though. Yeah.
I'm just learning so much from you. I think that this idea that Dr. Shawne is talking about of writing somebody else's apology for them. You know, the reason that we're aggrieved is someone had power over us. They either let us down or they used the power in the moment to bully us or to create a system of oppression or to cause some other sort of harm. And if they're still in our head, even though they're not in the room anymore, we are permitting them to keep having that power over us. A friend of mine, their father passed away 2 years ago. He will never be able to apologize to them. And yet his power is still in their head. The single most important thing we can do is, as you said, confront the thing we're holding on to, and then offer that apology from someone who can't or won't offer it to us, so that we can go back to being generative, so we can go back to being creative, to create the environment and the conditions for the next person to make things better, as opposed to wallowing in the thing that made things worse.
Yeah. Let me give a real tangible example. And those that hang out with me know that my daughter was pregnant in a high-risk pregnancy, and she has 2 other children, and her husband left her for another woman. I have permission to say that out loud. Okay. So I went down to Florida and hung out with her for a few months. It was a really difficult time. And I hated her husband. I was so mad, not only with my own stuff and my own heritage generationally from what's happened in families for generation, my own divorce 30 years ago, I was dealing with that. And then watching my daughter and my grandchildren go through excruciating abandonment, and hate was the word. So this was 2 years now. I've moved into deciding to forgive, and I've actually concluded I am going to forgive you. I don't know if it's complete. I'm at that conclusion. I forgive you, person. And then moving through the experience of forgiveness has brought up so much. And one of them that I noticed a month ago was how much I miss him. He was involved in our lives almost 20 years. I miss him. And that grief process is part of that as well. So that's how it might look. Maybe you'll do one first, you'll experience the second other. And this grief is so important, which is the perfect segue, Dr. Cleveland, because one of the things I love that you talk about. So we're going to put that to rest for right now. Maybe we'll come approach it some other time and do a deeper dive in critical thinking. You talk a lot about communal grief. There's a lot of communal grief right now, collectively, globally. So much is happening. Please explain. Will you talk about that concept a little bit for us?
Sure.
People are experiencing it. Yeah.
Yeah, but being born and raised in the West, I'm a Californian and an American. We're just taught to be so individualistic. And so if we have grief, we might journal about it if we're able to even get in touch with it. I mean, we don't really have a lot of practices in our society to actually to hold grief. But if we do, it's often very individualistic, and we're not sharing it with family or sharing it with friends. And so a lot of the work that we do at the Center for Justice and Renewal is connecting with some of those more ancestral practices. Many of our ancestral lines had whether it was around a fire, whether it was with drumming, often it was embodied in ways that goes beyond journaling, which is very, Western. Yeah. But the power there is that other people can grieve, can invite you into grief. People who have a deeper connection to grief, or people who have a story that resonates enough with yours that they can tap into that grief, even if they're not personally experiencing it. That creates a covering and a safe place for you to be real and say, I really miss, I'm mad and I miss him and I want to kill him, but I also want to hug him, and to be messy in that space with people around you holding you and helping you identify what's true and what is reactivity. And so there's a power there in the community to guide us through the grief passage. And it can look really different depending on the community.
Yeah. Seth, you want to add anything?
Well, the words matter. Grief is not the same as frustration or anger or resentment. Grief is the beginning of moving on. And one of the things that we've done in Western culture is we've used communities to amplify our anger. We've used communities to justify our anger. That's not grief. That is simply setting us up to not forgive and become productive, because social standing, affiliation, status within the community is partly earned by being the angriest person in the room. And you don't need to be in a room like that if you don't choose to be in a room like that. So the rooms I've been in where grief is what is being discussed are quiet. They are people who are holding each other and holding space for each other. That when I helped organize a few thousand people to create the Carbon Almanac in 90 countries, some people showed up and said, I want to be very angry right now at the banks, at the capitalist system, at the oil companies that are lying to us. And we said to each other, there is room to do that, but that is not what we are in this room to do. We are in this room to say a situation exists. It can be turned into a problem if we are willing to work at making it better, but we will not make it better if we're going to sit here being angry at the people who have lied to us. We're going to make it better by figuring out how together to take action. And so as generations shift, as the world changes now more than it has ever changed before, there's plenty of room for grief, and we need each other to go through it. So I just think we have to be on alert that we're not being a victim of somebody who needs us to be a victim.
Love that. This is a perfect moment to talk about the 5 phases of forgiveness that are commonly used: shock, anger, grief, acceptance, peace. Shock, anger, grief, acceptance, peace. And what I've learned in my research and in my working with folks is grief is usually the hardest one to be with, because that's, in my world, the most transformative place to be. Grief changes you. And there's a distinction between grief and suffering. And to me, the suffering would be staying in the anger, just like what you exactly said, Seth. So that was brilliant.
Can I add something quickly to that?
I want to get in. Yeah, please. Yes,
yeah.
Please.
I wanted to just add a really wise saying that's helped me from Dr. Emmanuel Katongole, who's a Ugandan theologian and Catholic priest. And because he's a theologian, he uses the word lament instead of grief. But I would say they often work hand in hand. And he says lament and hope are twin sisters walking hand in hand. And so I know I'm truly grieving. I know I'm truly in lament when it's giving way to hope. And if it's not giving way to hope, if it's not opening up space for hope, then that means that I'm probably still in that toxic anger stage. And that's the invitation to drop into true grief, because grief always leads to hope, because they're twin sisters walking hand in hand, which I just love. I love that idea. And that's from Dr. Emmanuel Katongole. Yeah.
Beautiful. I will look him up and I will mention that often moving forward, because that is exquisite. Love that. All right, let me shift gears real quick, shift over to another topic. Seth, I had a hard time picking which blog of Seth's I wanted to bring up. And even the one I read today, I'm like, oh, I could do that one. But no, I'm going to stick with the one you wrote one recently on the Pinocchio Protocol. We all know who Pinocchio is, the little wooden boy whose nose would grow when he tell a lie, so he couldn't tell a lie, and it's very visible. And Seth, you made some great comparisons. Gas-powered leaf blowers would disappear if the smoke they belched out was black instead of invisible. I did not know till following you, probably 15 years ago, that gas-powered leaf blowers harm the environment. I never knew that. I learned that from you. And if we actually saw it, we would go, wait a minute. And you did the same analogy with smoking, that if the deposits on our lungs weren't on our lungs, they showed up on our face, we'd have a very different choice in life. We'd be making different choices with that visibility. And you went on to say we're not good at paying attention to invisible or gradual outputs, because those are gradual. And you said the trick is simple: make it visible. Can you talk about this in regards to forgiveness? I loved this.
Well, first, I'm glad the post resonated with you. The hack feels pretty simple to me. If every single time you break the cycle of your generous and generative work to remind yourself about how angry you are about something, if every time you do that, you write it down in a journal with what time it was, and you go to bed at night and you see that you did that 32 times, 46 times, 18 times today, you're no longer pretending that it's not a problem. It's right there. You had to write it down every single time. And what will happen is it will be so annoying to you to have to keep writing it down. You won't keep thinking of it because you're associating now not the sweet revenge of reminding yourself of what a victim you are, but instead you're associating the coming back to that habit over and over again with the pain of taking out a pencil and writing it down in the book and the embarrassment of seeing that's all you're doing all day. That we can label things and come up with useful proxies instead of the false proxies of measuring the wrong thing in the wrong way. And this is one reason why peer coaching and things like Alcoholics Anonymous are so effective, why spiritual institutions work well when they work the best, is we are in a room with other people who can see us and who can tell us our truth that we can't see because we've hidden the narrative deep inside instead of saying it out loud or writing it down.
And making it visible. And I think that's brilliant. And I think of those of us who struggled with food and overeating. I always do really well when I write my food down. And I can transfer that to that skill you just said just now and transfer. And I'm really hoping folks that are listening will take that to heart because that's a great piece of advice. All right, we're coming to a close. I want to do one more question to tie us off. And challenging our belief systems, it's uncomfortable. It takes courage. It takes tenacity. It takes self-love. It takes compassion. And I just want you to leave us with some kind of thought around forgiving yourself and challenging as you challenge your belief systems and who are you going to be for yourself? Dr. Christena Cleveland, would you go first, please?
Yes, I love self-affirmation theory, which invites us to recognize that our whole self wants to feel good. Our whole self wants to feel like it has integrity. And so if we just take a moment to affirm an aspect of ourself that is important to us, that actually softens us so that we're more open to critical feedback or challenging beliefs that challenge our systems or our systemic beliefs. And so I think just that simple practice of maybe taking 5 minutes to journal about how good a person I am or how in alignment with my beliefs I am or how I volunteered last week or how I prayed or just whatever, because that actually kind of serves as a buffer to help me then open up to, okay, now I need to look at this situation that's complicated and might be challenging my beliefs and maybe might suggest that I have some things to work on and I can't just blame others. And it's a really beautiful opportunity to maintain that self-integrity by starting with some self-affirmation and some compassion.
Beautiful. Lovely. What about you, Seth? What do you think?
That's such a great riff. Thank you. When we have thoughts about the outside world, they're either true or they're not true. The world is not flat and 2 + 2 does not equal 6. But our beliefs, all our beliefs are true in that they are our beliefs. But all our beliefs are also false because they're not about the outside world. They're about a story we tell ourselves. So then we get to make a choice. We get to make a choice to say, is this belief I have useful? Is it useful for me to act like it's true? Or is it useful for me to realize that it's not true? Because it can be either one, because it's a belief. And we have work to do. We have people to help. We have connections to make. And if you are being kept back from that because of a story you are telling yourself, well, the story might be true, but the story might not be true. It's up to you.
Beautiful. Exquisite conversation in unpacking some belief systems and really diving into some critical thinking. Seth, Dr. Cleveland, thank you so much for being here. What a pure joy for me that you came and that I got to participate with you. So thank you for being here.
Thank you, Doc. This leadership is important. The ruckus you make really does matter. And thank you, Dr. Cleveland. I'm so thrilled I got to meet you.
Likewise, thank you to you both. What a rich conversation.
Beautiful. And I want to thank the Templeton World Charity Foundation for supporting this, discoverforgiveness.org. Remember, the download is at reach.discoverforgiveness.org. That's where you'll find the tool. I also want to shout out Max, Karen, Cheryl, and Faye for being excited about this possibility. And most of all, I want to thank you for even listening to the conversation, participating, critically thinking with us, and going to leave you with a Dr. Maya Angelou quote. History, despite its wrenching pain, cannot be unlived, but if faced with courage, need not be lived again. If inspired, take care.